Today we're going to continue our series, Old School, where we are looking at some of the greatest Bible narrative stories that are happening in the Old Testament. And if you missed it last week, you see this giant flannel graph behind me because I had this crazy idea to really go old school. And if you are confused, find somebody who maybe grew up in the church in the 80s and 90s and ask them what a flannel graph was, and they will tell you. This was the amazing technology that my children's church teachers taught with. All right, we didn't have VeggieTales or computers or projectors or those kind of things. This was cutting edge technology back then. And they would make the stories come to life using little characters. And it was funny, they had this little box of things and there was like one king. And so one week he would be Nebuchadnezzar, and one week he would be, Xerxes, and one week he would be Herod. And they just kind of bounced around, and it was amazing. You'll see. And since we're doing a series called Old School, we kind of went old school. And I was going to have Colt lead worship with an overhead projector. And then put the screens on backwards, because that happened, right? Those of you who are, I see, this is how I find out who's been in church a long time. That's good. But last week we looked at the story of David and Goliath. And we had an incredible time digging into that. But we talked about our identity and how if we misplace our identity, we misplace our power. And we want to be reminded of that. And so today we're going to look at the story of the fiery furnace. And if you have got your Bible or you got a device, open it up to Daniel chapter 3. I know it's a bit old school, but let me just encourage you to bring your Bible with you. There is something about having that Bible in your lap, right? Phones are great, but there's something missing, something about turning the pages in a physical Bible. I don't do it all the time, but when I do, I never regret it. And so I need to kind of set up the scene before we dive into the story of the fiery furnace. You have to understand the nation of Israel had been taken captive by the Babylonian Empire. This is all prophesied in Jeremiah, and they are right in the middle, the beginning of the 70-year exile that he talked about, where King Nebuchadnezzar, Nebi here, King Nebuchadnezzar is in charge, and he had taken some of the most perfect men from the Israeli royal family. If you go back to Daniel 1, you see this. And what he did was said, hey, we're going to take them, we're going to put them into our training, we're going to teach them, and we're going to feed them for 3 years, teach them all about Babylonian culture, and then we are going to put them into service for the king. So among these men from the tribe of Judah were 4 guys by the name of Daniel, who was given the Babylonian name Belteshazzar, which would totally make his book much more difficult to read. A guy by the name of Hananiah, who was given the name Shadrach. Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego. Some would call them Rakshak and Benny. These were young men from the royal family of the nation of Israel. And this event we're reading about today happens at least 3 years later than Daniel chapter 1, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are now in positions in the kingdom of the Babylonians. They are serving in the government. So when this crazy story happens around 600 BC, this is what happens. Most of us know the story, but in Daniel 3, here's what it says in verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it upon the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon, just outside of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials, all right, to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So, all of those names, I'm not going to read them again, assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Now, this is not surprising out of Nebuchadnezzar. He was a proud, arrogant man, and in the Babylonian Empire, there was this mindset that the king was considered God. He was considered a god. He was the most powerful person on the face of the earth, ruling by might and power of the Babylonian Empire. And so he decides to force people to worship him and give him praise. So he crafts this big statue of himself. The bunny, right? So we see the statue. Some of you will get that. If not, you need to go watch VeggieTales, all right? He crafts this big statue, and it's about 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide, most likely of himself, because if you're going to make a statue, why not? He created it, and he put it just outside the city of Babylon. There was this place called the Plains of Dura. It's a nice flat area where the statue was set up and would be able to be seen for a great distance. After getting it set up, he calls basically all of the workers of the province, the government officials. He calls them all, and they have to come and stand before this statue. Okay? And basically what he tells them, he says, okay, look, when they hear the music play, here's what you've got to do. You have to bow down and worship this image. If you don't, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace if you don't bow down immediately when the music starts playing. Now, it was pointed out in my study this week, and I had not really thought about this, that the people he called to this were the people who worked for him. So this just wasn't a test of obedience, it was a test of loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar alone. I am not going to try that at staff meeting this week. All right? No, just kidding. If you keep reading in the story, here's what happens. All of the instruments start to play. And everybody that is there bends their knee. They bow down. Well, apparently, there was 3 who didn't. Shadrach, and Benny. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is where we pick up the story. I want you to look at what happens next, okay? Verse 8. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into the blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon." Seems to be a little bit of jealousy here, by the way, if you notice this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you. Your majesty, they neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, I want you to remember, this was a total obedience and submission to the king's decree. Right? And when a king decreed something, you had to do it. They said, "King, everybody bowed down. We all bent the knee to the statue, except these 3 guys. These Jews that you put in the province in charge." We know exactly why they didn't bow. This was clearly breaking one of the 10 commandments. Worshiping a graven idol like this. But I can't stress this enough, because in our current culture this happens a lot, okay? Here's what they didn't do. They didn't go make a formal complaint. They didn't go and make a big scene. They just simply refrained from bowing to a graven idol. I don't want you to miss this. They didn't do some big public thing, but they also didn't hide it. They likely knew that they would be discovered, but their commitment to their God was so full that they could not compromise their faith to do this. And people noticed. And I don't know, I have a feeling it was jealousy from these astrologers or Chaldeans, is how it's translated in other versions, or they just wanted to be narcs, thinking that they might get in good with old King Nebi by doing this. But either way, what happened is they saw these 3 guys and knew that these 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, would get into trouble. And so if you go back to Daniel 1 and you begin to read about the way that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel were given favor by God, it was likely that these tattletales knew the commitment to their faith that these guys held, and they found the opportunity to take full advantage of it. Because in Daniel 1, they would not eat the king's food because it didn't meet the dietary restrictions of the Jewish people. And they went through this whole thing with the people giving them the food, and God blessed them and gave them favor. That's probably how they got into the leadership in the province of Babylon. Right? Now, these people also knew that Nebuchadnezzar was not a patient person who would care to even hear the reason for somebody's defiance. They used their faith to try and hurt them, and that's true today. I'm going to warn you right now. In your life, there will be people who want to see your faith hurt you. There will. There will be people at work. There will be people in your life. There will be even family members who see how you live your life, and they know what you believe, and they want to see it hurt you. That is, if you are living a faith out in a way that is meaningful, that has changed the way you handle people and the way you handle problems, and that you stay true to your faith. It might be someone who wants to do something in that gray area of business practices, or somebody who, wants to grab a meal with you and you're like, I can't do that. Or somebody in your kid's class who wants to point out that you go to a church that stands for biblical truth and that's not okay in our culture. It might even be a fellow brother or sister in Christ rooted in jealousy because your faith makes their faith look bad. And it might not even be about you. It might be the fact that you are living out your faith in a way that makes their faith look weak, and they don't like that, so they're going to try to hurt you. I can say that from experience. If you go back to Daniel 1, these three guys were not the only Israelites who were taken captive, which means that it's highly likely that these three guys were not the only Israelites who were put into the king's service. But they were the only ones who stood when everybody else kneeled. And maybe that made some of them feel guilty and hurt. And when my faith is challenged by someone else, sometimes I just want to see their faith hurt. I'll be real with you. Some of the most tense issues I have had in my life did not come from people outside my faith, but from inside the church. And don't think that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't think about this. They had the perfect answer, as we are going to see. This obviously situation did not sit well with King Nebuchadnezzar. I want you to see what happens. Verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Notice a different question. The command was to worship the idol. Now he's asking them, do you worship my gods? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? I love when people ask that question. It seems like Nebuchadnezzar, in some way, actually appreciated the value these guys brought to the kingdom. Okay, because what we know about Nebuchadnezzar from other writings, this is not his reputation. Nebuchadnezzar was not about giving second chances, only justice. In fact, in some ancient cuneiform writing, there are notes that say Nebuchadnezzar was described as so devoted to justice in what he said that he did not rest day or night. And it also talks in the same cuneiform writing about a criminal who was found guilty of a second offense, who did something twice, and Nebuchadnezzar had him decapitated and then had a stone image made of his head to give everybody else warning. This was not a guy that was prone to second chances. I want you to understand what's happening when they are standing in front of Nebuchadnezzar at this very moment. This was not a charity case. Everyone else had bowed down and worshiped, and they were all fine. But yet the one who stood for their faith quite literally were the ones that were now in trouble. I want us to see this picture. Everything in front of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the king, the furnace, the music, his fellow Jews, the competitors, all of it was conspiring to convince them to compromise their faith and kneel. All of it. I mean, wouldn't it be more impactful for God if you stayed alive? And all you had to do was just for a few moments bend your knee. God would understand. God would honor that, right? I mean, you would be doing it so that you had a longer time to have an impact for the kingdom of God, right? Being dead kind of means I have no more time to serve God. Everyone else around me is kneeling. What can I do? This is something we need to recognize in this world. There are always logical reasons to compromise my faith, but they are never for Christ. You want the reality? If they had done what everyone else did, no one would have batted an eye. The story wouldn't even be a story. They wouldn't have been looked down upon by the other Jews in Babylon. They would have been understood. It was logical. You know who Nebuchadnezzar is. You know what kind of psychopath that guy is. You know that you are living in a foreign country, and in order to survive, you need to blend in. This is exactly what happens in our world too. Oh, I better be careful so people don't think I'm some weird Jesus freak. Oh, I better just be quiet and not take a stand. And I want to be very careful here because I know some Christians are just looking for a fight. Please understand, these men did not come forward to make a scene. They did not come forward to make a spectacle. What they stood for was certainly, absolutely against one of the 10 commandments. This wasn't an open-handed issue. This wasn't a principle that was outside of the realm of things. This was a principle and a commandment that they had built their life in honor of God on. They didn't throw shade. They didn't post on social media. They didn't call out Nebuchadnezzar. Truthfully, I bet they hoped that they could not bow, and it wouldn't be a problem because everybody knew why they weren't bowing. Don't miss this. It wasn't out of disrespect for the king or authority that they didn't bow. It was out of love and obedience to the Lord Most High. This is a big difference. There are always logical reasons to compromise our faith. They knew what would happen if it got to Nebuchadnezzar, but, and this is the part we as a society and people who claim to be followers of Jesus miss. This is the part. If they compromised their faith would not have an impact. You can't compromise your integrity and expect it to make people want to know God more. Christians should be the hardest working, the most loyal, the most friendly, the most helpful people there are. Why? Because then you get to show love, serve others, and share truth. You get the opportunity. But this is not just a one-time thing for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were confronted in this story 3 different times with the opportunity to compromise. They were confronted with it at the first trumpet when they didn't bow. Then Nebuchadnezzar stands in front of them and goes, hey, if you're ready to bow, all is good. That's 2. The third one was a little bit hotter. They were confronted 3 times. All of those times they could have backed down, but they didn't. Why? Because God was more real to them than any of those other things. And they had their reply. This is so incredibly awesome. Look at verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, this is great. We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. You want to talk about a mic drop statement right there? Boom. Nebuchadnezzar went out of his way to give them a second chance. And I think, like I said, in some way, I think Nebuchadnezzar had this weird respect for them, and probably from Daniel 1, when they originally stood on their convictions. God blessed them. Maybe it was just their hard work. Either way, he brings this to them, and he goes, guys, is this true? Did you not bow? Did you not hear the music? Everybody heard the music. I'm going to give you another chance. and don't miss what they said. They go, hey, king, not worth it. We don't need to defend ourselves. If you throw us into the fire, our God can rescue us. But even if he chooses not to, we're not going to bow down to your idol. Look, they didn't deny the fact that they didn't bow down. But they also showed that they understood God's power. I want to show you something really cool that kind of recognized this week, and I've known it, but it's just cool. Can we put their response up on the screen again? Let's see if we can do this. Let's put it up on the screen, okay? Check this out. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. Right there in that statement is an understanding of God's power. King, you're not all that in a bag of chips. God is. I understand, King. Our God has the power to do whatever he wants to do. He can rescue us from the fiery furnace. He is able to deliver us. We know how powerful God is. And I love they say, and he will deliver us. Even if we die, he's going to deliver us from you. King, we understand the power of God. And then they say, check this out, but even if he doesn't, we want you to know, your majesty, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold. Even if he doesn't. Look, we know the God we serve is bigger than you. He is so powerful that he can do whatever he wants, and we really believe that. But listen, King, I'm going to tell you right now, if he chooses not to deliver us, I want you to see something different. They understood God's power, but they also understood God's will. He might not. He might not deliver us. Even if he doesn't decide to, that doesn't change his power. We are still going to stand for what we know is right in the eyes of our God. Can we just stop there? You understand they were making peace with their own death, right? They were okay with dying because of what they believed. This wasn't one of those times where they were making backdoor deals with God like we do. God, listen, I'm going to do this, but then you got to make sure the bad stuff doesn't happen to me. God, I'm going to do this. God, I love you and all, but you better come through or I'm going to back out. They didn't do that. Why? Because their obedience was not based in what God did for them. It was instead based on who God is to them. Understand this. My obedience to God should be based in who God is, not what God can do for me. It's awfully quiet in here. Let me say that again. My obedience to God should be based in who God is, not in what God can do for me. There are these three captives. Don't forget, Israel is in exile and they are not in control. They knew who God is and they were willing to stake their lives on it. They had no promises that God would come through. They had no clue how this story would end. And as far as they know, unless Nebuchadnezzar changes his rule and his threat of death by fiery furnace, this was their last stand. They had made peace with the fact that standing for God might cost them their life. And God stopped me this week, and he really wants me to say this to you as your pastor of this church. Sometimes we don't stand for God, not because we're fearful of our life, but we are scared of what people might say. I want to step out here and say, listen, if you love God and you come to church, I have numerous people over the last year tell me, oh man, I come to church because God has done so much for me. That is a very slippery slope. Because the moment you think God has stopped doing stuff for you, guess what you're going to stop doing? You should come to church because you know who God is. You should worship God because you know who he is. We just sang he is worthy of it all. All includes the mess. Sometimes we just don't because we're scared of what other people say. We're scared that culture would criticize us. These men basically resigned themselves to their own death because they believed who God is and held true to what he said. And in the entire nation of Babylon, they were the only three to do it. They were at the mercy of God's divine intervention in Nebuchadnezzar's nature. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar was not going to change his mind. Look at verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. Okay, now listen, the deep theological question. They did not have thermometers. How did he know it was 7 times hotter? I don't know. Anyway, moving on. But what we see, my brain, this is the way my brain works, y'all. He gets so furious that he gets so mad and he orders the fire heated 7 times hotter. He says, turn it up. He gets so angry because his attitude at this moment turned and he was red hot with rage and hatred. And for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he didn't just want to burn them. He wanted to incinerate them. Keep reading with me. So these men wearing their robes and trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the fiery furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace, which, by the way, should be the first clue that God's up to something. Okay? So these guys get bound, they get tied up, they get all messed up, and they get thrown into the furnace. While they're being thrown in, oh no! These guys die. Little child, I know. All right. This should have been our first clue. The guys outside the fire died. The guys inside the fire walking around. Should have been our first clue. Fire's so hot, they were killed. But these three men fall into the fiery furnace. Keep reading the story. This is where the story gets awesome. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaps to his feet in amazement and asks his advisors, weren't there three men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, Your Majesty. He said, look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the fourth looks like a son of the gods. Okay, forget what you know about this story for just a second. Let's go back to 600 BC with me, and you're standing in the crowd, and you are watching this all unfold. On your bingo board, did anybody have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walking around in a fire that killed the soldiers, unbound, even though they were tied up to throw up? Anybody have that on their bingo board? No. How about this one? Oh, we threw three guys into the fire, and then all of a sudden this other dude shows up. We don't know what he looks like, so that's why you get this, right? All right? I don't want anybody to go, well, that's not what Jesus looks like. It's okay, right? We see this. There's an extra figure in the fire. There will be another in the fire standing next, right? Apparently, according to Nebuchadnezzar, he says it looks like a son of the gods. I do not know who needs to hear this today. Listen to me. If you are here and you're like, I've never heard this story before, and this is crazy, you're hearing it for the first time, you don't know any details, and as this story unfolds, you really, let's be honest, these guys really have two options. They're either going to talk their way out of being thrown into the fire furnace, and Nebuchadnezzar backs down. Didn't happen. Or they're going to get thrown in, and they are going to be considered martyrs for their faith, and we're probably never going to hear their story. That seems to be the only two logical conclusions, correct? Like in your head, that's the only two ways to get out of this. And in my life and yours, we do this with all kinds of situations in our life. Oh, if I state my biblical belief at work, they're going to fire me. If I go talk to that person, they're going to either think I'm crazy or they're going to start a fight with me. You might be facing a situation similar to this one, maybe not an actual fiery furnace, or you're facing one that could end very, very badly and really mess up your life. But let me be the voice of such hope and encouragement for you today. You ready? God has options we can't even fathom. Like, God has options that we can't even fathom. No matter what situation you are facing today, you might only see a couple outcomes. Well, I'm either going to be miserable in my marriage or I'm going to get divorced. I'm either going to close this shop and go out of business or just struggle making ends meet for the rest of my life. I'm going to lose all my friends, or I'm just going to follow God very, very haphazardly. You might be in a situation that you don't know how you are going to get out of it, but you believe and trust that God led you into that situation. Listen to me. God has options that we can't fathom. This wasn't in anybody's dreams. Even in your dreams, you couldn't think of this as an out. Yeah, sure. Okay, guys, I know we're getting ready to take a stand for God, and we're not going to bow down to the idol, and I think this is what's going to happen. So Nebuchadnezzar is going to get really, really upset at us, and he's going to crank the fire up, and he's going to throw us into the fire, but it's cool because we're going to land in the bottom, and the only thing that's going to get burned up are the ropes that held us. And we're going to walk around in this really, really blazing hot furnace. Oh, and just to prove it's hot, the soldiers are going to die that threw us in, but we're going to be cool. I don't think we understand the miracle that just happened in the scriptures. Like this is not, right? This is amazing. And if you read the next few verses, this is exactly what happens. They were in the fire, and Nebuchadnezzar called them out, and they didn't smell like smoke. Their clothes are not singed. Their hair doesn't smell. Nothing happened to them. Man, if I am around a campfire for 3 days, I'm like, I smell like s'mores. They were in the fire. Look, they can't even dream up this scenario in Hollywood. And they got some crazy stories in Hollywood. They can't dream this up. All of this is happening because they were willing to trust in who God is, no matter the situation. And if you're facing an impossible situation when it comes to your faith, let me encourage you. Impossible doesn't apply to God. In fact, all through this book, what we see is impossible is where God thrives. Stage 4 cancer, God can heal it if he chooses to. Marriage in crumbles and about to end, God can restore it. Financial situations a mess, God can step in. I have had checks in my life that I didn't expect show up the moment I needed to pay a bill. But it all is predicated on my willingness and yours to submit to the commands of God because of who he is, not what he can do for us. And so as we wrap this up, the beauty of this is the impact it has on other people. Take a look at how Nebuchadnezzar changes his tune. Pulls the guys out of the fire. Verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I want you to notice, go back and read Daniel 3. All at the beginning of Daniel 3, it's little g God. Right here, big G, which is the name of God. Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's commands and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Understand, Nebuchadnezzar understands exactly what happened. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, now we see Nebuchadnezzar still stay true to himself here, be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save this way. Listen, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that based on this, that Nebuchadnezzar had a come to Jesus meeting and he followed God for the rest of his life. We know he didn't. But what I can tell you is that Nebuchadnezzar learned that day that the God of Israel deserves the respect and honor that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego gave to him. These three men took a stand, and it changed the way Nebuchadnezzar viewed God completely. And I want to remind us as we close, the way I submit to God can impact the way others see God. There is such an impact that can be made when a person submits their life to God in a real and simple way. Let me try to illustrate it really, really quickly. I'm going to ask you a question just by show of hands. By show of hands, how many of you at some point in your life were invited to church by someone that you had watched live out their faith in their life? It might have been your parents. Yeah. Absolutely. Every one of us, if we really think about it, we are here in this church because we saw someone at some point live out their faith in a way that made believing in Jesus possible. Some of us are the people who invited people. And the only reason they came was because they saw something in your faith that caused them to at least be open to God. And to turn this into a challenge, some of you invite people or talk to people all the time and they don't come to church with you. It might be because, dare I say it, your faith doesn't stand out in the face of adversity. Maybe you've caved and you bent your knee where God wanted you to take a stand. Listen, I've done both in my life. I had someone look me in the face one day when I was younger and said, wow, you go to church? While I was being paid by a church. We're not different. I mean, I'm going to tell you, that didn't happen this week, so don't everybody panic, okay? All right? But it happened in my life, and it's a gut check, right? If that's you and you feel that conviction, God wants to help you make a change. You are not alone. Some of the people who you look up to at one point would say that at some point in their life, they didn't live the way they should. This is the beauty of God. He can turn your mess into his miracle, your fears into faith, your cowardice into confidence. Today wasn't a message necessarily about Jesus, but I always want to take this moment and talk to those who may be seeking this relationship. We'd love to talk to you about Jesus. Their faith in God is the same faith we put in Jesus to rescue us. We'd love to talk to you and get your questions answered. We'd love to pray with you and pray over you. And I just want to encourage you at some point today, come see an elder in the corner. Come down front and talk to us. Come down to the altar, a prayer member, a staff person. We will sit with you. We will help you find the answers to your questions about Jesus. I'm going to tell you right now, and church, back me up, it will be the greatest decision you ever make in your life, to give your life to Jesus. We got people praying for you at this very moment that God would draw you to him. No matter what you're facing, let me encourage you to take this story of the fiery furnace and turn it into your example of how to trust God in every situation. Because God can work in so many ways that we can't even fathom. Because God is stronger and more powerful than anything we are facing. Drug addiction, marriage problems, money, anger, depression, no matter what it is, I will tell you right now, I know a name that has dominion over the mind. I know a name that has dominion over the earth. I know a name that can calm the waves in your life. And I get the pleasure of telling you, I call him Jesus. Today, let's make Jesus known in our struggles and in our life so that we can stand in the face of a fiery furnace. Church, pray with me. God, we come to you.